Thank you. Thank you. Oh, there are people here. So yeah. Okay. There's some people here. Okay, I apologize. I forgot how to get on the live stream. So if anyone can send something in the chat, let me know that you can hear me. That'd be great. Okay. Oh, Adam, thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, other Adam also. I was talking to Adam Bookoff. You don't know who you're talking to. I was talking to your husband. Yeah, a lot of Adam. I'm going to take credit for it. But a big thank you to Adam Pasternak for bringing all the yummy food, and Yashikos to everyone for coming, and to Zani and Bracha Vinik for a big sponsorship. Wow, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Okay, so it's very exciting for me because I told you last week this interesting theory that I had read secondhand in Rabbi Angel's book. Rabbi Angel, Chaim Angel was a Rebbe of mine, taught me Tanakh, and I thought it was really just a beautiful way, the way he teaches Tanakh. And I have some of his svarim that he gave me, and he quoted a theory from this Uriel Simon, who I don't know personally, I don't know much about him, but he has this whole sefer on, essentially, on understanding Sefer Tehillim. Hey girls, welcome. So, so this whole theory that Professor Simon has on Sefer Tehillim, and I got the book this week, and so I could kind of do a deeper dive into his book, and then share with you some of the Torah. Here, come, you guys can see it. These are my students from I know. Come, welcome. Here, come sit. So nice to see you guys. Okay. So essentially, we're going to do a deeper dive into understanding Sefer Tehillim. We gave the backdrop last week that essentially Sefer Tehillim right now is we're spending more time on it. It's kind of a little more top of mind, so it helps understand what exactly we're trying to learn. Okay, so we're gonna jump into the sources. The goal is to kind of take a deeper dive into the theory that was suggested last week. So let's just recap the theory of Rav Sadia Gaon. So shir number 1 that we gave last week was Rav Sadia Gaon felt that essentially David HaMelech wrote every single one of the 150 Prakim of Tehillim. How did he write them? Rav Sadia Gaon's theory we saw last week was essentially that Tehillim was nevuah. It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's spoken word. It wasn't just like David just was a good poet. He was just writing from his beautiful, deep, soulful heart. That was not what Rav Sadia Gaon felt. He felt that it was nevuah. And the question is that so many of the prakim we're going to see inside have a koteret, have like a header that mentions someone else's name. So how do you say David Melech wrote it when we're going to go through some of the Tehillim, and we're going to see that that's not necessarily what the obvious theory to suggest who wrote Tehillim. It's not necessarily the obvious approach or theory to suggest the mechanism of Tehillim. That Tehillim is literally Dvar Hashem, coming down from God, not man speaking to Hashem, but Rav Sadia Gaon felt it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to God, and because of that, his theory was that is why Tehillim is not tefillah. Tefillah, and we're kind of doing it now that we're in Eis Tzara. We're doing Tehillim because it's not a regular Shemona Esrei. We have this rabbinic prayer called Shemona Esrei the rabbis came up with, but essentially Rav Sadia Gaon's theory is that Tehillim is Dvar Hashem coming down, and that disqualifies it, ironically, as being Dvar Hashem. It's not tefillah, which is supposed to be we pray from a humanistic perspective to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was his theory. Okay, you shake your head already because it's so hard to digest that theory.
What if my friend says to me, Mike, how do you pray? And I say, okay, here's a tefillah, and they use that tefillah. It's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching tefillah.
Beautiful.
Man-made.
Beautiful.
Right?
It's still man-made in that case.
In which case?
In your case.
So what?
It's coming from man as opposed to coming from God.
Okay.
It's directional.
No. You're right.
And you have to come from God. It has to come from us.
You're both right. And what we're going to see is this. What I didn't stop even last week is that it's a huge debate over what should prayer be. Dafka, this conversation is part of the Nikurus Machlokas, the core part of the discussion is, well, what is prayer? And what should prayer be? And for those who were not here, we said that there may be outside influences which pushed Rav Sadia Gaon into making this theory. we said last week, just for those who weren't here, and we're going to see the sources inside because they're cool to see some of the original sources, that there may have been a Karaite group, a group of a sect of Judaism who was not necessarily following, say, the rabbinic approach. They had a different idea what Judaism should look like, and they prayed with Tehillim. Tehillim was like their siddur. They didn't have a rabbinic siddur like we have. Open up your article, your Quran, whatever. They didn't have that. They had Tehillim. So Professor Simon, Dr. Rabbi, I don't know who he is exactly, but he feels that it may have been the influence of this other group, non-rabbinic group, that influenced Rasad Yagon in the 9th century, 10th century, for exactly the exact years. But that was his theory. I want to study the theory because we just said it at the end of this year last year. We didn't go through how would that even play out? What does that look like? And part of my goal of why I'm doing this is I don't want Tehillim to be a closed book to us. I've never learned Tehillim myself. So here I am, like, they're like, Rabbi, pick the prakim of Tehillim. Okay, so sometimes, there's some Tehillim that I know because we've been through other Eish Tzaras in my life, but I don't feel it's an open book to me. I don't feel like, like Rabbi Yudin, he could just like open up and like he knows which prakim say what. It's a closed book to me. So I want it to be more of an open book that we should be more comfortable referencing different parts of Tehillim, and that's why I think it's cool and interesting to learn some of Tehillim and how it plays into this big debate. I saw a hand.
When he said Rasadi was influenced, maybe he was pushing against
a polemic against the Karaites. That's the theory, the working theory that we presented at the end of last week. Yeah, Sarah.
Wouldn't it be that the Tehillim is like tefillah because it's from Hashem? Like, why is tefillah that's from I think the Amoran or the
Anshe Kesagdola perhaps wrote this siddur, right?
So, like, something comes from human. Like, why is that tefillah then Tehillim isn't if it's from Hashem or say?
So good. So that's the debate we were having here. Is which way is tefillah supposed to be going? Is it supposed to be that human beings we're frail, we are finite, and we are trying to communicate our humanistic experience of Hakadosh Baruch Hu and say it's complicated, and we're talking to God. We usually think of Torah as God speaks to us, and tefillah as we speak to Hashem. So the question is, should Tehillim, if Tehillim, David HaMelech wrote it, it's man-made, could that be our tefillah? Because David HaMelech speaks with so many different emotions in Tehillim, could that just be the way we channel our conversation through David's words? We saw last week he was called Ne'im Zmiro Yisrael. He was like the beautiful singer of the Jewish people. He knew how to write tefillah. He's like the ultimate paitan. We would use that language. Can we just carry his words because he wrote beautiful words? Or do we say that Rav Sari Gaon is saying the fact that it comes from God, it disqualifies it from being the siddur because it's not man-made. It should emanate from man. Josh?
I don't know if this point was mentioned in the past, but the Yud Gimel Midos is like that prototypical example where God told us, "Here's how you should daven," and we use that.
Right. So that would support Michael saying, "Why can't it come from God?" Right? We give you the text. And that's probably the quintessential tefillah, where God literally, Gemara says, wraps himself in a talus and demonstrates tefillah for us. Yeah, it's a great support to saying, why can't it be from God given? Why does it need to be from man? Yeah.
I don't know a lot about what we call prophecy versus like divine.
Ruach HaKodesh. We're talking Ruach HaKodesh, right?
Like, they're not like this idea that like we get something that is man-made, but it is like guided by the divine.
The Rambam says there is you can make, for those who understand this, there are clear distinctions. What is Ruach HaKodesh and what is Nevuah? And there are different guidelines of what is divine inspiration. And we said
for sure one or the other, not just like
and we'll see that in the
I
discussion.
don't really feel that about like it's known in Spain, which are like really important and sometimes part of our liturgy, but like we think that way about the Chadodi.
Right. I think after I don't think so. I think after was a time. Today we have no more Nevuah, right? The era of Nevuah has ceased. I'm pretty sure. What was it? Ezra, Chai, Zechariah, Malachi. There is, I think, we're even at the end of Ruach HaKodesh. I don't think Ruach HaKodesh exists today, as far as I understand. I have not yet had it. I'm still waiting. So I don't think we have it. So I would think that there's Siyata D'Shmaya, right? That who wrote L'Chadori again? Shlomo Akbar. I would hope maybe he had Siyata D'Shmaya. The fact that his tefillah became such a beautiful tefillah in our liturgy. Yeah, that's Siyata D'Shmaya. But Ruach HaKodesh, I don't know. Ruach HaKodesh literally is like the divine hand is like inspiring you to write whatever you write. That's what Esther, when she wrote Megillat Esther, they say Esther wrote it with Mordechai. Esther wrote it with Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, so let's see some of the sources. So one of the things that I did not realize, and this will be for the next year, is that there are actually two versions of the Ibn Ezra. And we'll get into that in a later share. File that away for later. But the Ibn Ezra, one of the classic commentators, he quotes this approach of Rav Saadia Gaon. So in source number 1, in his Akdama, he says, in the third line, he says, Machlokes gedola yesh binos hamafarshim. There's a great debate amongst mafarshim. Yesh omrim, ki kol sefer leDavid v'hayanavi. Some say the whole book is written by or spoken by David HaMelech, and he was a Navi. And he goes on to give proofs to this. Mrs. David Ish Elokim. The Chemi refers to David as a man of God. And this language of Ish Elokim is not spoken about except on a Navi. Right? We think of David as the king. So now his first part is, David wasn't just the king, wasn't just a warrior, he also was a Navi. There's a passage in Shmuel Bet that says literally the Spirit of God. This sounds more like Ruach HaKodesh Chaim. Ruach Hashem Diber Bi. The Spirit of God speaks from within me. It's like God is speaking through me. I become a kli. I become a mechanism through God's speech. We have other languages that it seems to be that David HaMelech had some sort of a Ruach HaKodesh or Nevuah. It says, but this is the part we did not analyze last week. If we say David HaMelech was spoken to by God, the words of Tehillim, so let's go through the prakim. He says, "Umatzanu sham yedotan mechubar in David v'Mizmor." We find there are other names of characters which are referenced in Tehillim. So we have this guy Yedutan. It says, "V'hayakain ki amizmor leDavid v'natnu liyedotan lenagain." This is the part we didn't get into last week, which is, so if David HaMelech is the author, who are these other names? So essentially, the theory that Ibn Ezra is quoting from this unknown Rishon, but we clearly would identify this with Rav Saadia Gaon. We saw Rav Saadia Gaon last week, and we'll see some other parts of it, is he felt that the other names mentioned are all Leviim who live in David HaMelech's era. That in David HaMelech's era, which is pre-Beis HaMikdash, David HaMelech he was not Zochar to build a basement, but there was a Mishkan, there was some sort of, they had an Aron, right? There was some early, pre-temple, and there were Leviim in that existence, and those people were called the Mishorim. They were the singers. They were the shul choir, right? The Leviim's role was they were singers. He says, Kihu echa min ha-menatzchim. So this Yedotan was a Levite, a Levi who lives during that day, and he was one of the singers. V'kacha l'shlomo Elokim yishpedach l'melech. And when David HaMelech speaks about Shlomo, Nevuat David l'Shlomo, it's a nevuah that David said about his son Shlomo. Because according to this approach, David wrote all of them. It's not authorship to Shlomo. It's not authorship to Yedotan. Let's see the example. Tehillim Ayin Bet. The parak starts Lishlomo, source 2. Lishlomo Elokim mishpatecha l'melech tein zidkas leben melech. To Lishlomo, to Shlomo, Hashem should give judgment and give righteousness to the son of the king. So one could read this as one of two ways. Li Shlomo means like Shlomo is writing it, and Shlomo saying, I'm writing this about God, help me out. Elokim mishpatecha l'melech tein, v'tidka leben melech, right? Be kind to me, I'm the son of the earlier king. And then the parak ends, you'll look through the parak, but I just want to point out the end. This is the parak we quoted last week that ends off, Kalu tefilot David ben Yishai. The very last pasuk in that parak says, and here ends the tefillot of David ben Yishai. So this is the most clear example that Rav Saadia Gaon would argue. This shows that Lishlomo means what? Two. Which means, so how do we categorize saying Lishlomo, that here ends what David wrote, Lishlomo? It sounds like what? What type of genre we put it in? Sounds to me like a tefillah or an ode. We'd call it in English like an ode l'shlomo, a tefillah l'shlomo, right? He's saying it ends up. The last part says, "Kalu tefilot ben David ben Yishai." This is the end of the tefillos of the Tati of David. He's like almost like praying l'shlomo for my son Shlomo. Yada yada yada. Please look out for him in his mouth. That's the theory of Rav Saadia Gaon. And then he goes on to say, He goes on to say, you know what? I just want to show you that. What's really cool about this shir, understanding a little background of Tehillim, is once you understand this like underlying major debate, this meta debate that's going on about Rishonim, about who wrote Sefer Tehillim. Now, when you look at the Rishonim, you see how confusing like the commentary on the various prakim of Tehillim are, because they're all kind of either taking a side or confused themselves of what's going on here. For example, I'll show you an example here. Rashi. See a Rashi? Rashi on that parak of Parak Ayin Bet says, what's Li Shlomo? He says it's Al Shlomo Beno Hitpalel Tfilah Zu. Regarding, he learns Al, not or to or upon or about Shlomo, my son, I'm davening for him. Shetzipa Baruch HaKodesh Hu Ati Lishol Meit Kadosh Baruch Hu Leiv Lavin Lishmo Mishpat. And Rashi gives the context. We know Shlomo Melech was the king who was considered the wisest of men, and he asked for wisdom. And so his dad had Ruach HaKodesh that one day Shlomo's going to be this wise king with very difficult piskei halacha that he's going to have to give. And the father was davening for his son that he should kind of have Hashem's help when he's going to be in that position.
But are there those who hold that, like Tefillah LaMoshe, that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it, or to Shlomo that Shlomo wrote it? Are there those that hold
Yes,
that?
yes. We're just now in the first opinion that Rasai Gon says, yes, the more obvious choice, and a spoiler alert, almost the conventional approach that almost most Rishonim take is not like Rasai Gon. It's almost Rasai Gon is like, really? That this is Nevuah from David? There's not, to say David wrote the Tehillim that say Mizmor LaAsaf. It doesn't mention David's name. I gave you an easy one. It mentions David's name at the end. And it's his son, right?
Like Korach,
Correct.
Lamanatseah.
Well, I'm not saying there's a word about to the singers or who's the. Actually, I don't have a good definition what the word Lamanatseah is. He says in the first line, he says a Mishorer conductor, right? Who's the conductor, right? Is that David? You have to look it up. Who exactly? I'm sure you're showing what we're going to say. Yeah.
It's not a question for everyone, but what does this sheet to do with the last pasuk? That this is where David Ben Yishai's kilos end. So there's a lot more Tehillim after this.
Right. So I think the Rasad Yagon points that's Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah.
This is the last one.
You mentioned it last
I think I mentioned it last week. Rashi. I'm going to put it again. It's on the sheet for last week. Rashi proves from here that it must be Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah. That Tehillim is not written chronologically because it wouldn't make sense. It's number 72.
There's the last one composed.
What Rashi said was it was composed at the end of David Melech's life for Shlomo, which implies, right, was David alive when Shlomo took over? Yeah, because he says about Sheva, right? Doesn't he say, I want him to take over, right? So there's almost the implication of Rashi is that this is written way towards the end of David's life. Why is it number 72? So Rasad Gon says because they're not written in chronological order. That's a good question. Okay? So, but you see in Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra says, source 4, Nivuat David or Echad HaMishorim. Either it's a Nivuah, which would fit like Rasad Yagon, or it's one of the Mishorim, maybe one of the singers. But he's not necessarily saying that Shlomo Melech wrote it, right? We still have not yet seen one that says that authorship is ascribed to the person mentioned. Okay, so what I also see here is a difference, like Chaim points out. In Rashi says, "See, pa Ruach HaKodesh." David's using Ruach HaKodesh. Even as it says Nivuat David, there's Nivuah. So everyone's trying to figure this out. It's not clear to the fact when anytime you have 4 opinions on something, you're like it's not so clear. Either every opinion has a flaw. That's what we're seeing here is that it's really not so clear cut. Okay, here's another example. Tehillim Parak Samach Bet. Source 5. Lamnatzeach al Yidutun Mizmor LeDavid. Who's this Yidutun? So Rashi says Yidutun in source 6 is Shem Kli Shir. It's not even a person. Rashi says it's an instrument. Oh, have you ever played the Yidutun? You don't know about it. It was an old ancient instrument, and you don't know about it because it doesn't exist today. But it's the Yidutun. Oh, it has a little bit. It says tune in it. Yeah. Okay, good rabbinic humor. Okay, so but Ibn Ezra says, look at Ibn Ezra on that parak. He says, Noam Piyut Chilato Yidutun Shechibru Yidutun HaMishorer. There he does say, kind of what Michael was saying, that this guy Yidutun wrote this parak of Tehillim, O Acher Chibru Alav, or someone else wrote it about him, Ulioto Kli Rachaku. Ibn Ezra does not like Rashi's approach to say it's a Kli. So that's not pshat. It's not a vessel. It's not a musical instrument. So again, it's just very interesting that if you want to actually study the Rishonim, how they approach each of the individual prakim, you realize it's fitting into a much bigger argument of how do we understand Sefer Tehillim. And then the third example is Tefillah Moshe. This is another famous one where it talks about a name, Parak Tzadi. Tefillah Moshe Ish Elokim. It seems to be a tefillah for Moshe, the man of God. I think let's ask you, what do you think the more obvious approach would be? Tefillah Moshe would be who wrote this? Tefillah Moshe, and he wrote a tefillah, right? It seems to be that Moshe wrote it. Tefillah Moshe, right? That's what I would have thought the conventional approach is before I looked into this debate, right? So that's what Rashi says. Rashi says, source 9, according to Rashi says that this and the next 10 prakim that follow, Moshe did write 11 prakim of Sefer Tehillim, which is a good chunk, right? And this we saw last week, Gemara in Bava Basra. The Gemara said that there were multiple authors. David wrote the majority of them. He gets a lot of credit for it, but ultimately there were other contributing authors and perhaps even editors after David. That was what we saw in the Gemara Bava Basra. Okay, Ibn Ezra, source 10, says, Lafi da'ati shemoshe adonenu chiber zot hatfilah. He says, okay, again, Ibn Ezra seems to be ascribing the shita that the noun, the person written, wrote it. Kihi alashon rabim, vein divri David kacha. That's an interesting comment. Ibn Ezra says that there's some like allusion if David HaMelech wrote in a personal voice. He wrote personal voices as if he's praying for himself, right? And he says here, this one is lashon rabim. The term harim yuladu. I didn't look carefully at it. Tashiv enosh adaka tomer shubu b'nei adam. I guess this is more lashon rabim. I'd have to look more carefully on this parak of Tehillim. But he's saying there also you can pick apart a parak and try to figure out is the lashon rabim or yachid. So anyway, so it's just fascinating. You can't really. When I first started, thought I'd teach Tehillim, I thought we just go parak by parak, and we just learn a parak, and we look at the Rishonim, and I teach it to you. But I realized, A, that might be dry, and B, there's a much more meta issue going on here about authorship. That's very interesting to me. Yeah, Chaim.
So in this passage, the Gemara says that there's multiple authors. So who are these like, is it because it's a very like
Fascinating
Gemara?
What?
Is it like a very Agadic Gemara that doesn't like kind of.
Everyone's trying to figure out how come Rasad Yugon just disregards the Gemara and takes the non-obvious approach, and that's why he develops this theory that it had to been. And we'll see some of the Karaite literature that was going on in this time because it's shocking that he would disregard the Gemara. The Gemara is the obvious thing is to say the Gemara says it. There was multiple editors. David wrote a lot of them. Some other people had contributing. That's what the Gemara says. It's shocking that Rasad Yugon is disagreeing with the Gemara. And it's not just one. There was a Medrash Shir Rabbi we saw last week, right? There's a few rabbinic sources that he's basically saying, no, I don't agree with that.
Is the order kind of universally agreed on?
I think what I've seen is that the counting of the prakim is different, right? I think somewhere it says there are 147 prakim, and somewhere it says 150 prakim, and the Gemara says, oh, it just depends how you break up. Like 1 and 2, some say are just 1. If you lump certain prakim together, you could get a different number then. But the content is the same, but the breakdown of prakim. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Let's see Rasad Yugon. I want you to see a little more of his theory because I only shared with you the main theory. I did some more reading of it. I was like, wow, there's some other gems. It's a fascinating theory. Okay. So he says a few things that I thought were interesting. Again, you might hate it, and the question with the Gemara is a great question. But he says on page 3, my computer's making noise. Try to mute everything. WhatsApp's always muted. It's my computer sometimes. Okay, so he says on page 2, read the underline part on the right side column. He says, "The kevan shadavar min advarim." Everyone see where I am? It's like footnote 44 there. It says, "Kevan shadavar min advarim abruim hare lo tzoraf yudotanim David mixas hatzionim." Don't say that Yudotan kind of helped David. They co-authored some prakim. Rather, the Mizmor was written by David. The Yudotan minoihu shenit manelav. He's just the designated Levi who's going to sing it. Almost like, by the way, I just learned this in music. I never realized it until last year or so. You know that a lot of like the famous Jewish singers, they don't write their own music.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like you think these guys are like these amazing. How do they come with all this stuff? Apparently, there are individuals who are really good at lyrics and tunes, but at bad voices.
Like boys.
Yeah, they're just like, or they're just random people who are good at certain parts of the musical, process, but doesn't mean they're good performers. Doesn't mean they have good voices. They can just be creative writers.
I thought non-Jews wrote it for them and made songs that they're earlier.
It's the same.
I don't know. Non-Jews, I don't know.
Elton John.
Elton John did not write his own,
No, Bernie Taupin wrote it.
right? And he was the performer.
Elton John wrote the music.
Right, but he didn't write the lyrics.
But it's a great mashal. It's really similar to what's going on here. So what according to what Rasaigon says is Avashitov Yudotan Imasaf Bnei Korach Eman, who are all these other people? They were the singers. They were the performers. For all we know, David had a bad voice. Maybe he wasn't very melodical, right? We don't know. It could be he was a big tzaddik. He was a musician. He played the harp. Right. He was a musician. He could be the backup. You're right.
Maybe he couldn't sing.
Maybe he didn't have a voice.
He wasn't a Levi.
He wasn't a Levi. He's a melody. That's the implications. Yes. Amru Tefillah Moshe Ish Elokim, who shir nimsar lebnei Moshe. It was David wrote odes. He wrote tefillot, whatever you want to call them. He wrote Rasaigon thinks they're nivuot, but he wrote these nivuot and he gave them to Bnei Moshe, the descendants of Moshe, and said, you know what? I wrote this. I have this great nivuah that I heard from God, and you guys are his descendants. I want you to sing this particular part. The Bnei Moshe, who were Levium, sang the paragraph that was to Moshe. Then he goes on to say this whole theory. On the left side column, this is very cool. He says, one thing we have not talked about is, why is the book called Tehillim? What does Tehillim mean? I'm not a grammarian, so I might be wrong, but I think it means songs or prayers.
Praises.
Praises? Is
It's
that
like Hallel. It's from the same root of Hallel.
Tehillim? Okay. Tehillim. I thought it meant like to praise or to praises.
Right? If it means
What's a
praise,
psalm?
is it a prayer then?
What?
Like the whole thing is about how like we don't know if it's a tefillah, like a prayer, but if it means praises, like is that the same like
It's singing praises. We're singing God's praise. Listen to what he says. He says,
Tefillah.
Tehillah L'David.
No,
Tehillah is a praise. So listen to what he said. Yeah, I said we should look into like the etymology of this word. But he says, since this theory is correct, Nikra Sefer Zeh Sefer HaTehillim, it's called Tehillim. They sung this in the Mikdash. David HaMelech gave over this Mishmar and said, these are the songs. Ki'ilu, he said, these are the songs that we're going to sing. He was orchestrating the original song list, the playlist of the Beis Hamikdash. And what were the rules? Whoever I said they're supposed to sing, it's for them. Fascinating. Rasaigon says these were songs that were very intentional for a specific regiment to be said by certain people at certain times in the Mikdash, and anyone else who reads them can just read them. But their nevuah is meant to be sung as part of the service, and they're not meant for anyone else to be singing them, because Rasaigon doesn't want this to become tefillah. Right? He's trying to keep it away from tefillah. He wants it to be. This was something that was done in the Mikdash when they were Levium. They were designated, and if your name is not Bnei Haman or Bnei Korach or Yedutun, it's not your job. You shouldn't be saying. You can read it, you can learn it, you can study it, but this is not tefillah, which is just really, really interesting to me. And then if you turn the page, he goes to say something that not only did David HaMelech give us these prakim, this is another Tanai, another condition of how these prakim of Tehillim should be recited. Hatanai Hasheni, Sheyesh Min HaMizmarim, top of page 4, Shu Belachan Echad. Everything needs to be Belachan Echad. What's Lachan? It says Kulo Velo Yishtaneh, and one Lachan that shouldn't change. Uhu Koma Shetzivanu Be'echut Al Niginat. Ki Amru Niginatu Lachan. There was a tune. Apparently, there's a Masorah. I don't know if you have this Masorah. It'd be very cool to see if any like pious old Jews in Yerushalayim know what the tunes are. Apparently, there were tunes that were associated with the prakim that were sung in the Beis Hamikdash. Different prakim of Tehillim had a different tune. Listen to what he says. says Mehem Shu Never Lachnim Rabbi Mishonim who Masha Patach Bo Benigiot. Some had many lachan, many tunes. Ki niginot mashma lachanim rabim. A niginot means there are multiple tunes. Umehem Shu Never Lachan Gavoa. And some needed to be sung in a louder lachan, a louder tune. One second. Hu Mashitzivanu Shir Hamalot. What is Shir Hamalot? We just said it after Marav tonight. Shir Hamalot. What is Hamalot? Malot literally means ascent. Ascent. Well, steps is the rabbinic interpretation of it, to ascend. But it's a song of ascent. What is Shir Hamalot? Mash Mevaer Shamalot Hu Haramat Kol Amru. Fascinating. Fascinating. Rav Sadion says Shir Hamalot means you were supposed to raise your voice. It's when the choir, the orchestras, pick it up. Like there was a certain louder tune that went along with it. Okay, I think it's just very interesting that Rasad Yagon felt that these Parakot Dilim were from David Melech. They were very specifically given to certain individuals to be sung as part of like an early liturgy, we call it, like a pre-sitter, right? We're talking about pre-sitter when Rasad Yagon, and they had a very specific tune. Okay. Up until now, comments, questions, thoughts?
There's a trump on the Tehillim, just like there is on the Chumash. I don't think anyone knows how to do it because
We never learned it.
right, and it's slightly different from the way it looks in the Chumash.
That was developed
By who? I don't know.
I don't think at the time it was written.
The
You don't
trump.
think it was
I
done?
don't think
at
the
the-
authors added the trap to the Sifrei.
Really?
But
I don't think
the
so.
like the kudos aren't there. It doesn't mean like there wasn't a sword for it.
Right. It was a Sifrei.
Presumably there was a Masorah, right? Right.
There's also, I don't have any it's weird. There's like a lot of very strange things.
Yeah. What is there?
Like just like sideways letters.
Like a very interesting Masorah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the one I saw was like a normal one, but like it's very Kabbalistic. Like, it's not just like there's like all sorts of
Added.
like, words written on the side.
Interesting. I've never seen. Okay.
There's one at the Kotel.
I have to take a field trip. Take a field trip to see. Okay, Talia. Yeah.
What the time that Rasadi Bone was having the theory, was halal said on Yom Tov the way we do it now, or was that not instituted yet?
So in time of David Melech or Rasad Yagon?
Like meaning otherwise, if it was, I want to know what his answer to that would be. Like, did he think everyone was wrong for saying halal?
Wow, that's such a good question. Because Talia is saying last week we learned the Gemara Pesachim. The Gemara Pesachim said there's a debate who wrote Halal. And we said Halal comes from, many of the Prakim come from Tehillim. And one of the Svaras, it was Machloket, was there's no way from Moshe to David there was no Halal. Clearly had Halal. So maybe Moshe wrote some Prakim of Tehillim, and then David was the final editor. That was the Machlok we saw last week about who wrote Halal. But Talia is asking now, that takes us to David's time. But that means in David's time for sure, everyone agrees they had Halal, right?
Right. So like, did he think that people should not say
I mean,
that?
it's a great question, but there is precedent. You say Shema as part of Tehillim.
The Shema's,
Shema is
Torah.
not.
the Shema's from the Torah.
It's
It's a
But Shema, right? But Shema has him saying so. Then Shema has a din of Talmud Torah, right? There's if it's in the Torah,
Right.
then there's a din.
But I
of
think
Talmud.
Tehillim is like in a totally different category. It's from Ketuvim. It's like that's why there's a whole debate.
But you're saying here's the question. So Rasadi
Rasad thinks that there shouldn't be tefillah.
He said talking about Tehillim specifically.
Rasadi is saying that it's Torah, right?
I think that's sort of what we're.
He's saying it's Nevuah. I don't know if that's the same. It's not the same as
Yeah.
Torah. Shema is like its own thing. Kriyat Shema is a separate thing from davening.
I think the
It's
thing
not
that
necessarily a tefillah.
Right. I don't think it is.
It's something we have to say because we have to acknowledge Hashem twice a day. Brachos.
We think of it as part of our davening now because we have like a whole sitter and
Shema is like
whatever,
a
but
double
like it's not. It's Kriyat Shema. It's its own thing.
I think you have to say, and this is something the more I'm looking into this, the more I realize, is what we take for granted is we have a fixed sitter, is there was no fixed sitter.
Mm.
You have to imagine a day where there's no Shemona Esrei. There literally is no Shemona. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There's not Korbanos yet, or no, maybe they're Korbanos, presumably, because they have them as bad, right? There's a Mishkan, something, but there's no sitter. So if they had Halal, because we saw they did have Halal, presumably, I'm thinking, couldn't that fit in with his theory that there were Prakim of Tehillim that needed to be said by certain Levim, where certain singers were given?
So regular people wouldn't.
It could be that in the Migdash, there was a Halal recitation by certain Levim who sung it, but not necessarily by the masses.
But then what about like in his own time, Like if he's saying, I understand he's saying like Tehillim, we shouldn't do it as davening. We have this Shemona Esrei, but what about Hallel?
Yeah, but we specifically, like the Gemara says, we say Hallel 18 times during the year, or whatever. Like we're saying as part of
he
davening, and we're
seems pretty
using
ready to argue
Tehillim
with
for
the Gemara.
davening.
So
It's a good
Strong
question.
question.
It's a great question. It's a great.
I don't know if he addressed it at all.
It's easier to answer in the Mikdash. You can say they did it.
Right.
The question is, what did prayer look like if you lived in Sipori, you lived in Tiberia, you weren't in Yerushalayim? What did your prayer look like there? That's where your question is. I don't know if we have an answer.
So he doesn't address that.
It's a really long and trying to read the whole thing, so he might. He might. I just read bits and pieces. I got up to like page 30, and that's when.
I mean, clearly we have Tehillim as parts of our job. Like we include it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
like Hallel is
Sukkot is
part of one of the
Emor,
reasons
Hallel.
Sukkot is Emor is obviously like so. Obviously we do. I
We
mean,
do
I don't know
now.
what he says with that.
No, I know we do now. I'm saying
Well,
like he
I
was.
mean, Hallel was clearly instituted during the Gemara's time as a tefillah, and Sukkot is
But the
Emor,
Gemara
I think,
also clearly said that David didn't write the law. So I'm just curious to know.
It's a great-
like, if
it's a great
Rasadi Gold
question.
would have had an answer for the question of Hallel.
Let's look into it. Let's see what we can find. Yeah, Sarah.
Okay, so now that like what Sadia was saying, how I'm confused because is this saying that David wrote like when then like when's the timeline of like David wrote it before or after? When did he add the Shir Lamalos? Like when did he add that they were singing it? Like did he write it but then they sing it so then he added the Shir Lamalos? Like when was like
When you say Shema, you mean like the Kotera? Like, what do you mean by
I'm
Shema?
saying this is saying that they
David wrote all 150 in his lifetime. He passed them on to Levine. He gave them a book of songs. Said, "These are the songs. I'm going to teach you how to daven, how the service should look like in the Mikdash. When you do korbanos, these are the tefillos that should go with the korbanos."
Mhm.
It's actually a pasuk in Divrei Hayam. I think I put it later on the. It's a pasuk in the end. If you look at source 19, all the way on page 6, Divrei Hayam is a parak that says, "Vayitain lifnei Aaron Hashem." Source 19. Vayitain lifnei Aaron Hashem min halavim mishartim, and he put before the ark of Hashem from the Levium who were serving. L'azkiru hodot la'alel Hashem Elokei Yisrael. There's the word Hallel, right? To how to give praise and thanks and to mention to Hashem. And it mentions some of the people. Asaf Harosh. Asaf was one of these people. It mentioned about a bunch of people. And then look at Pasuk Zion. Bayomahu az Natan David Barosh Lodot Hashem biad Asaf ve'echad. David gave over to this guy Asaf, who was one of the Levium in that time period, what it means to say thanks to Hashem. And the Rasai Gaon quotes this pasuk as kind of saying, basically, that David did write an initial tefillah, but it looked very different than what we have. It was basically, he gave which praktim, which we said by which singers at which point in the service. So that seems to imply that David Melch in his lifetime gave over some initial draft. We'll call it like an early draft of what davening may have looked like. Did that answer?
yeah. It doesn't answer like the
The Nigunim part. And presumably there was a nigga that came along with it. Presumably. Okay. So what we mentioned last week, which we have not got to, and we're not going to finish the whole year tonight because there's so much to talk about, and I love it that you guys are interested. But there's this really, really, really complicated parak that up until now we've talked about prakim, which mention individual people. All those people, according to what we said so far, lived during David's lifetime. There are these Levium who have names, Asaph. And when it's Moshe, it's actually Moshe's descendants he's giving it to. It's like, I have this tefillah. It's about your great-great-great-great-grandfather. You should sing it because it's you're his descendants. You're B'nai Korach. You're descendant, great-great-great. You'll sing the one that I wrote about B'nai Korach. That's his theory. There's a parak which we have to address. I mentioned it last week as a complicated parak, and that's parak Kuf Lamed Zayin. Okay? Again, this is part of why I want you guys to feel that Tehillim is not a closed book, and that's source 13. Source 13 is cool. It's a cool parak. We're familiar with it, but we never probably learned it unless maybe in seminaries they teach. I know in yeshivas I never learned this stuff. So he says, this is the parak. We'll learn the parak. Al Narot Bavel, on the rivers of Babylonia, Sham Yashavnu Gambachinu B'Zachrinu Et Zion. There we sat and we cried, remembering Zion. Al Aravim B'Tocha Talinu Kino Rotenu. I'm going to read the English, upon the willows in its midst, we hung up our harps. We didn't want to sing. Kisham she'elunu shovenu divrei shir. There our captives asked us to sing. V'tolalenu simcha, and our tormentors asked us, simcha shiru lanu mishir tzion, asked us, sing us some of your songs. Sing us some of your songs that you used to sing in your mikdash. Presumably we're talking about post-Churban, right? The Perek is describing a historical event which takes place on the riverbanks of Babylonia. Babylonians, a reminder, I got some of my history wrong last week, so I want to clarify. The Babylonians were the ones Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beit HaMikdash. So this is about 500 years or so after David's lifetime, because David Melech never saw the Beit HaMikdash. So we're way past David Melech's era. And what did the Levium respond? So beautiful. How can we sing those songs that we used to sing in the Beit HaMikdash on foreign soil? If I forget Jerusalem, it's as if I forgot my right hand. These are psukim which we're so familiar with, and hopefully now we can give a whole another layer and depth to understanding this parak. Who wrote this parak? Who wrote this parak? So what are our options? Right. So option number one is do it. What's the more logical option though? Ezra. Anyone who was living after Bias Rishon, anyone who was living in the 70 years in Babylonia, right? Ezra would be a great person. Anyone who lived in that period, Mordechai, anyone who lived in Galus should be the author of this parak, because it seems such vivid imagery, such vivid historical imagery, like that our captors asked us to sing the songs of the Mikdash. Like, no, how could we? We're in Galus. We can't. What? Maybe said Nevuah, right? Right. That's and that's the other option. That's what Marjorie suggested. The other option is that David HaMelech had Nevuah of a Churban that was going to take place 500-600 years later after. David HaMelech didn't even see the Mesa Mikdash. So he'd have a Nevuah about the destruction, and what would it look like? The conversation that take place on the banks of the rivers of Babylonia. That's a fascinating idea. Yes, Marjorie.
The second destruction.
What?
The second destruction.
Did I write the second destruction? Where are you looking? Oh, Zechor Hashem Bnei Adom. Why is it mentioned in the Edom? Not sure. The days when they say raise the base of English to its foundation, right? That happened. The base of English was destroyed. It was raised down. Yeah, I don't know. I have to look into the Rishon. Who is Edom? We're in Galus Edom now. I forget Rome. That's the second base. That's what Marjorie's saying.
Yeah.
You're saying maybe there's a reference rate to the second base of English, and that would fit.
Nevuah doesn't seem so far fetched
Then Nevuah doesn't seem so. Oh, is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. If there's a reference to Bnei Edom, was Bnei Edom a thing during when Ezra's living? Is Edom a thing? Are they people?
Rome, right?
Right, because it'd be interesting is if it was Ezra, would Ezra been able to talk about Edom? You can say in Ruach HaKodesh also. It's very interesting to try to understand what is going on in this parak. Yeah, Chaim?
That's like some precedent, for example, in the Torah, the last psukim, like Moshe wrote it about something that didn't happen yet, potentially, according to one. Maybe David wrote it about something that didn't happen yet.
So that's where Sadigon feels. He feels that, but you see in the Yisharim that it's not so clear. Not so clear. Okay, so what are we? It's getting later a little bit. So just you see Rashi says Shalom Nebuchadnezzar Shiashilo Kamotre Mishmar Al Duchan. I just thought it was cool because Rashi's saying that they were asked by their tormentors, their captors, sing like you used to sing in the Duchan, like when you used to do this in the Beit Mikdash. And now we've seen that according to Rasadi Golan, that was like a big part of what Tehillim was written for, just for that, the Duchan, like what happened in the Beit Mikdash. Okay, so that's Rasadi Golan's theory. I want to posit. I think what we should do in the time we have, because we're not going to get through everything. Let's see some of the academic work. I think it might be interesting to see what some of the Karaites said, and maybe that will help us understand why Rav Saadia Gaon said what he said. Okay, so let's look at the quotes on the last page 8 and 9. Okay. So the question we're kind of dealing with now is, again, why did Rav go make this like pretty outlandish theory when the Gemara didn't say that and the rabbinic sources didn't say it? So look what he says here on page 8 where the arrow is. We'll start from there. Anyone want to read? It's English.
I got
Okay, please, Sarah.
okay. Sadia,
Uh-huh.
Sadia accordingly differentiates between the ostensible prayers of Moshe and David, which are in fact pure prophecies. The rabbinic prayer, which is indeed human speech that truly expresses the worshipper's standing before his heavenly master, although not an individual supplication, since it is couched in terms set by the elders and prophets, as explained below.
Yeah, just skip the parentheses.
Thus, from the fact that the
The Karaites. This is another sect who had a different way. They were trying to advocate for a different way of service of Hashem. Basically, they're these sectarian sects that were very prevalent in the early temple period, in the second temple period. Apparently, they were also, these debates raged for many years about what Judaism should look like post temple.
Karaites use the Psalms in their worship. He concludes not only that they are guilty of a rhetorical error, but also that they ignore the prophetic nature of the Psalms in order to render them fit for utterance by a worshiper.
So he felt that you couldn't have tefillah, which is nevuah, be tefillah because they're disqualified because it's from Dvar Hashem. Go ahead.
The truth is,
he's going to say what Michael said before.
The truth is that the Karaites had no trouble bridging the gap between the
liturgical
nature of the Psalms and their prophetic status, because they had adopted the
rabbinic
conception of the dual nature of prophetic prayer. The prophet addresses the Lord even while it's the Holy Spirit that shapes his words.
I think that's what you were saying. This Professor Simon is saying it's not a disqualification. The Karaites could just respond to Rav Gaon and say, well, God gave us the words and doesn't disqualify it just because God gave it to us. He gave us the words that he wants us to say, similar to the Yud Gimel Minu Torah. I think that's what he's kind of positing for them.
Why is he called a rabbinic conception?
Say it again?
Why is he called that a rabbinic conception?
I think it's even stronger. I think like the way the Rambam understands nevuah that's outside of the Torah is like you get a nevuah person heard from God, but it's still his obligation to write what he interpreted into words. So even if you say it's a nevuah, it's still David's obligation to write down, like choose the exact words, even if it's coming from nevuah. Right. So there's still a rabbinic conception, or like even while it's the Holy Spirit that shapes it, it's still actually a human's words for everything that's not Torah itself.
Okay,
that's true that they had different styles, but I don't know that's what he means. Like, no,
I didn't understand. You're talking about a whole thing about what's nevuah versus Ruach HaKodesh. Where nevuah, I think they say Rambam says you get the actual words, you hear the words. Ruach HaKodesh is that you're just divinely inspired what the writing.
Does Rambam say you get an image and then you have to interpret it?
There's also a difference in motion. Right, Rambam does say, no. I teach from Mishmar. It talks about all this stuff. The mirror, mara, right? So we'll save that aside for another time. We have to chew on this a little bit. Maybe just end with just because I want to end for tonight. I think we're getting a little bit late. So let me just show you one thing that really interesting. Here are some of the Karaite actual original primary documents. She says, we find it difficult to understand why Saudi had to resort to such a radical argument about the nature of the Book of Psalms. We fail to comprehend the full effect of the Karaite polemics on the subject of prayer. So look at the quote. He's quoting from a Karaite, Daniel al-Kamusi, whoever that is, at the end of the 9th and beginning of the 10th century. So these Karaites are living in the time period of Rav Sadia Gaon. And there with the arrow on the bottom says, this is due to the this is from the Karaites. Listen to the sharp words he's going to say. This is due to the perversion of the commandments given us and to the wicked laws taught by the misleading shepherds. Worse than all of this is that even when Israel gathers on the fast days and the Day of Atonement, they have placed in their mouths many words, liturgies in which there is no delight, instead of songs from Psalms, or I will recount the kind acts of the Lord, or psukim from Isaiah, Daniel, Nehemiah. The rabbis say none of this. So clearly, it's a primary document where the Karaites are calling out the rabbis, saying, "Why are you making up the Shemona Esrei? Why are you making up these tefillot, which are by the way, now I'm paying more attention. A lot of tefillot are just like hodgepodge of psukim from various parts of Nach, but they're not necessarily in order, right? So what's going on here? So he calls it this perversion of the commandments, which delays the redemption of Israel, manifests itself in the realm of prayer by the rabbinic adornment of mandated biblical prayers and the replacement by non-prophetic piyutim, which God takes no delight. This grave indictment evidently impugns not only piyutim in the narrow sense, but also the entire prescribed right of the rabbinic prayer book. If you look in the 2 paragraphs down, where it says that prayer, he's quoting from another Karaite, from Kir Kisani, Jacob Al-Kir Kisani. Here he says another thing. He says, that prayer ought to consist of the Psalms and the words of David would be almost a logical imperative, even where there are no scriptural proofs thereof. None of our people dispute this except for the rabbis. But they, after admitting its necessity, reneged and denied it. It is known that they admitted because, as mentioned in the beginning of our book, they say at the beginning of the prayers, who chose David as servant and found pleasure in his holy songs. Simply, they begin their prayer, Shemona Esrei, with David's words, Hashem Svasai Tiftach, from Psalms. Include with his words, may the words of my mouth find favor. Their denial seems to be caused by their hatred and disdain for those who pray in this way, carried to the point, it has been said that once upon a time they considered removing the book of Psalms from the canon. Fascinating. So it seems that people have hated rabbis for a very long time. That's what I took out of this. There's a long, long history of people not liking what the rabbis have to say and having machloket with the rabbanim. That the rabbanim basically post by Shani, probably, right? Anshe Zaydol, I think, is by Shani. After the canon is up, they were coming up with their own prayer, and not everyone liked it. And these are primary sources which show there was tension.
But they were also against the authority of the Rabbanan altogether, in anything.
Yeah, correct.
In anything.
Correct. The Karaites had a different way of
Are they
understanding.
Jewish?
Yeah, they were Jewish. They were these sectarian groups.
They're Jewish.
They're Jewish. They're Jewish.
Edom is.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. It's complicated. They're different. What?
You wouldn't give them sheesh.
You wouldn't give them shishi. Okay, but yeah, it was complicated. I think it's fascinating because basically what we're getting at. Well, I think I want to wrap up. It's 9:30. I think we should wrap up, and we'll pick up next week. But I think what we're getting at is to understand that the siddur that we know today as like, I open it, I've said it since I was 4 or 5, I open them and like, I thought these are just time immemorial, every Jew has always been saying these words, is very far from the case. The siddur has been a organic working document, and there's been argument over the years over what prayer should look like. If you start to understand Tehillim, you're really starting to really take a step back and say, well, what is the siddur? And we see there have been fierce debates over this issue. Next week we have some. We'll see more primary sources that the challenges were bigger than just Tehillim, but all of this was probably playing. Now we also see the time period. These people lived in the 9th, 10th century. Last week we weren't sure about that. This seems to give us proof that Rasad Yugon was responding to something, right? The question of Chaim is saying, why would he not use the Gemara? We're seeing because there was in his lifetime a challenge and a threat of what prayer should look like. It should be Tehillim. None of the Shemona Esrei garbage. But that was the it should be Tehillim. We have Tehillim. And this idea that Tehillim was almost not put in the canon, I never heard that before, right? That there was some challenge whether Tehillim should be one of the 24 books because there's so much debate over the role of Tehillim in Tefillah and in its liturgy. I think it's fascinating stuff. So I hope you enjoy the shir. And we'll pick up next week with this is all we always done is one theory, the Rasad Yugon. But hopefully next week we'll pick it up and try to see some other theories beyond Rasad Yugon. Okay? Okay. Shkayach, everyone. Have a good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Thank you to our sponsors and thank you everyone.